by Carol Huntley and Karen Nelson, made in 2003. The sale of these is going to benefit the Friends of the Seymour Library tonight. So if you would like to bid on those, we have sheets up. You can go over anytime tonight and place a bid on that. All the proceeds go to the Friends of the Seymour Library. Well, that's it for just a few minutes. I'm sorry. We wanted to go ahead and let everybody know that, so you could put on that. She's been helpful with us too. Yeah, I don't mind. I've done it last quarter.
I caught part of your announcement about the auction.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Friends of Seymour Library's program, What Tales These Threads Can Tell. My name is Kelly Curtis. We'd also like to say thank you to Joanna Dougherty and Colleen Shannon for organizing tonight's program. We want to draw your attention to our 2 silent auction quilts that are over here available for you to bid on tonight. All the proceeds go to the Friends of the Seymour Library. We are selling books over here from the mouth of Boyds Creek and the accompanying map. Those are each $25 a piece. And we are also selling Laura Metz's books, The Family of Quilters. That is also $20. 10 of that goes to the Friends of the Seymour Library tonight. So if you want to purchase those, they're all over here for sale. We'd like to welcome members of the Seymour Quilt Guild, hoping next year that we can have a program together and we can do a show and tell of all of our local Seymour quilters. So first, I was going to explain just for a second about quilts. I brought my quilt frame. I built my quilt frame. I'm a hand quilter. I'm a little bit of a hand quilter snob. But so a quilt, I think everybody in here basically understands the process of quilting. So I don't have to go too much into that one. I would like to say, though, the importance of labels. And I'm going to start with mine, and that will kind of show you part of, before I do mine, we're going to show these two. So this first quilt is my Carm quilt. This is a satin quilt that I bought for $25 at Carm. It was made in the 60s, probably from, they said funeral ribbons, but there's no label on it. So I have no idea who made it or when they made it. So that's also really important. Then this other one, we bought at a yard sale. And again, there's no label, but it's really cool. So put labels on your quilts. All right, so then we'll start with, I'm going to go ahead and start with my 2, and then we're going to go down the line and let everybody explain and give an explanation of their quilts as we go. So, this first quilt, also without a label, came from my grandmother's attic. But we did have it appraised. It was made in 1870 to 1890 out of fine dress material. It's quilted in a Baptist band pattern, and it is of Southern design. But again, there's no label. So all I know is it came out of my grandmother's attic. They dated it 1870 to 1890. So this one also, the blocks came out of my grandmother's attic. So my grandmother was Annabelle Randall's. She quilted the blocks, or she didn't quilt, she pieced the blocks. Then we found them in the attic. My dad gave them to me. They were in a brown paper bag. My mom sashed them with the pink fabric. Then I quilted it. My son helped me quilt it. We entered it. I won 2nd place in the Sevier County Fair. The lady that beat me was in her 90s. I'll let her have that. Yeah, the lady that beat me is in her 90s. Yeah. All right, so next I have Liliana Ramos. Come stand a second. Would you like to tell us about your quilt?
This is my quilt. I quilted it with my grandma Dee Dee. And I got first place in the Sevier County Fair and a purple ribbon with
Excellence in Quilting, also from the Sevier County Fair.
And I won 3rd place in 2024 Mountain Quilt Fest.
We wanted Lily to come and show so that everybody would see that generational quilting is still alive. Yay. All right, next up we have Laura Metz.
Okay, this first quilt, I don't know exactly who made it. I inherited it from my mother's cousin, and she had gotten it from her sister, who would be my mother's cousin. And so it has pictures of Providence Baptist Church, and so I assume it was made by the women at Providence Baptist Church in honor of the Women's Baptist Union, WMU, which is their missionary group. And it's dated 1988, I think. And that was the centennial. And then WMU, they dropped that and started another program, I think in the 1990s. So the cousin that gave me the quilt said she drew the church on the bottom row. So my assumption is different women made the blocks, and Jean Keeble, if any of you know her, Perry Jean Sawyer's Keeble, was the owner of it. And they passed it to me. So if anybody knows anything else about it, be sure and let me know. Okay, this quilt, I like to pretend that it's my baby quilt. My mother collected wool suits and skirts and cut them up in squares and made quilts. And so when she passed, this quilt top was in a trunk, and I inherited it. So I kind of relined up some of the rows and tied it with cotton batting.
You want to tell them about that? They both the fabric.
Yeah, Mom always did flannel plaid on the back of her quilts. Now this quilt, now how many of you inherited quilt tops or quilt blocks? Well, what do you do with quilt blocks? So they sat in a box for a long time. And so I finally decided to just be a solid piece of fabric. And then I positioned the blocks and turned the 1/4 inch edge under and appliqued them down. So those were my mother's blocks. So you can use those, we call them orphan blocks. So that's the 3 that I brought. Yeah, it was really interesting. That quilt is in the book that I wrote. And yeah, just getting the information down, and I got a label on it, but I put the information in the book too. Thank you.
All right, Patty, you're next.
Oh, okay. I also wanted to, this was one without a label. I'm not even really sure. Yeah, I don't need it. Can y'all hear me okay? I can put my picture voice on. I think I brought this one mainly because of, this was dated between 1860 and 1890. And you can tell because of the colors, the indigos, the clarets, that's how you would date it. It's also a southern quilt because it has no borders. That was very traditional, and it is, the quilting is on the diagonal, which is pretty, it's not in very good shape, but it does tell a story. So. So all of these are old quilts, right? So I'm not going to show that mine. All except mine. All were old but mine. This is a really cool quilt. This is the first time y'all seen it. I found out earlier this evening when I came in. This is called a pyramid quilt. This was made by a lady who grew up in Gatlinburg area and then moved to Boyds Creek. I found out just tonight that family members are here from the family that I bought it from. I was taking my daughter to band camp at Seymour, and there was a sale going on right down where the coffee shop is now. There was a house there, and I saw all these quilts hanging, and I thought, they're having a yard sale. They're not going to sell those quilts. And so I jumped out of the car and I said, "Are you selling the quilts?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay. Do you want cash or check?" And I said, "I'll be back." And she said, "Well, which ones do you want?" I said, "All of them." And I will tell you, they would only charge me $50 a piece. I mean, I ran as quick as I could to the store. So in light of that, this is really cool. I am returning. I have 2 of the 5 originals that I bought, and I'm going to return them to the family. So I'll let you know. So that's really cool. So since Kelly showed her new one, I'll show mine. I thought we were doing mine and all this stuff. Well, this one is one that I did and finished it during COVID, and you'll see why. This is an old pattern. It's called Jack's Chain. And it took forever because these are all Y seams. There's not a straight seam. The straight seam is only 3 inches long. So one of the ladies in our guild was teaching the class, and it took me a year to commit to it. But this one, 5th place in Mountain Quilt Fest and Pigeon Forge, and 2nd place at Smoky Mountain. So it will belong to one of the triplets. And it has a label on it.
Yeah. What's the name of it again?
Jack's Chain. It's an old pattern. Do you know how old pattern is?
No, but you have to mark every single seam when you go.
Okay.
I can speak it.
Yeah, you're that one. Yeah, we're holding you there speaking. Yeah. Is this one next? Yes. Okay. We figured it might be next. Yeah.
This next quilt comes from the Keener-Johnson family. We wanted to have quilts representing some of the families that are in our book From the Mouth of Boyds Creek. Glenda Johnson located this quilt and said that she believes it was made by the grandmother of her late husband, Charles Johnson. You know, the Keener-Johnson house is the brick house about where Shiloh comes into Boyds Creek. It's one of the oldest houses in the Boyds Creek area. This is known as New York Beauty now, but when it was made, it was Crown of Thorns. And originally, the khaki color was green, but most of the greens fade to that khaki color. So it was turn of the century, and there is a quilt in one of these books from Cobb County, which is almost identical to this, and was made in 1890, I believe.
Is that one machine quilted or hand?
Oh, no.
It's hand
I
quilted.
thought it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Although they had machines back
Look
then.
at that.
Yeah, I thought you don't like one.
But there's no label on this, so we're just guessing that it was made by Hannah Keener, grandmother of Charles Johnson. Our next one, we do know the provenance of it thanks to Brenda Manus. In the 40s and 50s, a group of women from the Boyds Creek area formed the Jolly Sewing Club. And Brenda's mother was one of the members. As a teenager, Brenda would attend the meetings of the Jolly Sewing Club, And the women would bring whatever they were working on. It may be mending, it may be sewing, crocheting, knitting, but they also each gave 20 cents each meeting toward what would be the prizes at their Christmas meeting when they played bingo. Well, in 1956, they decided to make this friendship quilt. And so you know all about it because the dates and the names of each of the members are on the quilt. And at the December 56 Christmas meeting, Brenda's mother, Espelete Rudd, won this quilt. But the quilt members said, after you die, this should go to Brenda. And so Brenda now cherishes this quilt and uses it on one of her beds. Now we're going to go down to the end of Boyds Creek Highway to another one of the oldest families, the Trundle family. When I talked with Pam Trundle Tarwater about having a quilt in our program, she had dozens and dozens of family quilts made by all the women members of the Trundle family, but none of them were labeled. So this one, she believes, was made by Kathleen Hammer Trundle. It is, well, let me go backwards. You see the indigo colors. Indigo became very popular around the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th century, and was used a lot in home decor. The Women's Christian Temperance Union also chose these colors for the colors of their organization. And some say that this pattern, Drunkard's path, was connected to the Women's Christian Temperance Union. We only know that it was probably made in the early 20th century. And if you're not familiar with the Trundle farm, it's the one where the Buckingham House is located and the Trundle Cemetery, and it's directly across the road from Island View School. And the neighbor of Island View School is our friend Barbara Hodges. Barbara, you come up.
Well, maybe not. No. Okay. Okay. Tails to tail. Okay. I may be the only one here that is not a quilter, but I wasn't when I came. I may be probably. Okay. Across from the Trundles, there are three families that have been there for about 150 years. The Hammers, the Hodges, and the Hendersons. Well, George Henderson had a daughter named George Henderson, and she married Otis or Toby Hodges, the boy next door. Aunt George, her brother-in-law, made a quilt frame to go in the basement of their house, and she made what's called utility quilts from scratch. She liked to make clothes, and these are all from scratch, from clothes that she had made. And some of them, you can see baby clothes in there extend. And those are baby clothes from little baby Stephen Hodges, my first child, who now lives in their house with his children. So these were just to keep you warm on the bed.
We had a date. She lived from 1902 to 1986, so it was. Yeah, 30 something. Okay. I had a grandmother. And up the back stairs, she liked to applique quilts. And again, these were just to keep you warm on the feather bed. Her name was Anna McChesney McCroskey Cox. And she was born in 1874, got married in 1895, died in 1959.
This is the familiar sunbonnet Sue pattern. It originated in England in 1870 as an illustration in greeting cards. And now it has been one of the most popular patterns of applique quilts. And there are many variations. This is sunbonnet Sue.
And in this area, it's Dutch doll.
Dutch doll. I actually have a quilt that came from Cabbagetown in Atlanta, where Appalachian migrants went to Atlanta to work in the textile factories. And mine is a variation of the sunbonnet Sue or the Dutch doll, but it's about an Appalachian quilter living in Cabbagetown in Atlanta.
This is another Anna McChesney McCroskey Cox.
Yeah. Barbara has a number of these that are variations of this pattern, and we thought this must have been a kit, and the quilter would then put her own touch, and so each one of them, even though they're basically the same colors, each one is different design. And we figured that one was about 1930s, 1940s.
No, earlier. Yeah,
You think so?
1890 to 1910 probably.
I'm sorry, we can't hear. Oh, we were discussing because Carol and I were agreeing that we think it's younger than 1900.
We said 1890 to 1910.
Yes.
It could be good. That would make her like 25 years old.
It's beautiful, it's in good condition.
Mhm.
Nice, tiny, tiny.
You see the quilting on the back.
Yes, yeah, you see the quilting.
Okay, we are going to move to the plumber, hammer, Lyle, etc. family. And I'm going to hand this over to John Plumber.
Is there a order, John?
Yes, we start with the, for those of you, I'm new to the area, really. I married into the Hammer family that has the old schoolhouse on the Boyds Creek. And toward the end of my quilt, we'll have 5 generations of quilters. But this was done by my mother. This was not done on Boyds Creek. My mother was 15 when she did this. And it's applique. All this is appliqued on to a white background. This is one of my favorite quilts. As a kid, we didn't have a living room in our house. Our living room was the bedroom that my parents used. But every Sunday, this quilt was on the bed, in that bedroom. Or when we had company, this quilt was on the bed. And I said to my mother, you don't have any other quilts? She said, that's the reason. She did not quilt it. We think the lady that took care of her when she was small, the black lady, we think she quilted the quilt, but my mother did all the applique. So that was done at what is now Fort Campbell, Kentucky, is where my mother grew up. And she finished it just before she started college, before she was 16. And she finished it. That's one of my favorites because my mother did it. Now, the other quilts that I have will be Boyds Creek. My mother-in-law grew up on the property that the schoolhouse is, the Hammer property. Her mother grew up in the old house just past where Barbara is, the old house that's fallen down. Just past-
Trees growing up in the.
Yeah, trees growing up in it. And that was my wife's great-grandmother. She did this quilt in the late 1800s. Here, what's the title of it? Pattern?
Oh, did we just all have it?
I have it
I
somewhere.
don't remember.
And on the front. Oh, on the front. We were talking about something.
But that is appliqued onto right here.
Yes. It's not on.
It's
I
not,
do remember us discussing.
I have 37 quilts, so I don't
Hey,
remember.
John, do you have your appraisal?
No, what?
Your appraisal?
Yeah.
You should have had it on.
I can find the right one. Here it is. It's snowflake variation. And it was probably done 1880. And it was done by Susan Runyon Henderson. And the old Henderson house, my wife's great-grandparents, I think he was married either 3 or 4 times and had 4 sets of children from each marriage. But this was, my wife's great-grandmother did this quilt. This is another one that Nancy Suzanne Runyon Henderson they did. This is one of my favorites that she did. And it's chipyard variation. And this is the one I think we figured out, these are different in the quilting of them.
2 and 2.
And this was from probably 1885.
This is Suzanne's.
Yes, that was
You
my
talk about
wife's,
Quilting, because it's so consistent. And she-
that was my wife's great-grandmother.
Let's see if I can show some.
Now, my wife's grandmother married Mac Hammer, and right after you cross Boyds Creek where they built that new big subdivision, there's a big farmhouse on the right with a big barn out back that has the star in it at Christmas time. That's where Mac Hammer was raised. So they were inside of each other almost, and they lived between the 2 farms. Now, this one was done by my wife's grandmother, Ollie Henderson Hammer. And we think it was done, it's a mourning quilt. Her sister died, and we think this was when I had this appraised, the appraisal told me that you very, very seldom see a black and white quilt. This is one of the few black and white quilts. And this was probably late 18, early 1900s. And there is one, is this one? I think this is the one that has one brown.
Oh, yeah.
I think this may not be it. There's 2 or 3 of the mourning quilts. It must be the other one. It has one piece that's a little different than the rest of them.
Do they know what more?
Okay, this was mourning the death of her sister. Her sister died giving birth to right after a child was born. And she asked my wife's grandmother to take care of the child, and my wife's grandmother ended up marrying her sister's husband. And then they had 4 children. So those children, the child and those children were half brother and sister and also first cousin.
So the question was asked, does everybody know what mourning is? Mourning cloth. Mourning cloth was worn, especially during Queen Victoria, after Albert died, and she went in and she started wearing the black clothes, and that became not only a tradition, but almost a mandate everywhere. So it's very rare. When Carol and I were, Laura, were you there too? At the first reveal when we first saw this, and the appraiser, we were all going, oh, what? And John said, what's so important about that? I said, you never see them. You see little pieces in other quilts. But this family was able to afford the fabric to be able to plan this quilt, which is absolutely gorgeous. Oh, and Carol, what's the pattern on this? What did she call it? It was the friendship circle? Friendship something? Is that on the appraisal?
No, it's not. But it looks almost like the, I can't think of what it is now.
Sort of looks like a swastika.
Yes.
It sort of looks like a swastika. But
Yes.
I think that it's called it's a friendship pattern.
And that's the other thing I found out from the appraisal. Usually a quilt like this, the family was pretty affluent because they bought material to do the quilt. Very different than where it was a piecework quilt. Like the one my mother did, the pink one, the first one we looked at, that was a kit that was probably purchased. Now this one was also done by my wife's grandmother, Ollie Henderson Hammer. And I like it, I like the colors in it. And it's called Pyramid. Carol,
Yeah, I have one. That's what that was, the pyramid.
and this one there is, it's got a border up here that's different than the rest of the quilt. It's not anywhere else on the quilt. You see?
See how it looks like it's been added? Yeah.
They got the quilt and it probably wasn't long enough, so they did that. The other thing that when they appraised my quilts, and I don't have one with me, but sometimes one side of the quilt will be fancier than the other side. And they said that they knew which bed it was going to go on. And so they knew that the other side would be against the wall, so the fancy side would be out. And when you look at the quilts, I mean, you see it when you look at them. This one was done in around 1900.
So, Laura, was this the one that had the neon?
The light green in the middle.
This one right here.
I think that's neon.
Yeah, the purple one.
There's
I'll
one
hold
more
up that corner.
right here.
Those help date the fabric also, because that was what, late 1800s. It was called neon.
And
That's
in
what
this,
neon did.
in this quilt, there's several pieces that were from the quilt we looked at before.
Oh, and this is the one that has just the one orange
Yes.
triangle. And so we were thinking that, wasn't that sort of a sign she was making a statement about her political state or whatever? Even back then, they were like, let me show you.
We have looked through these quilts probably 5 or 6 times with the appraiser and with Patty and Carol. And every time we look through them, we find something. And we were looking for, we thought it was on this quilt. We have one quilt that has a pyramid that's quilted. And evidently, it's right in the middle of the quilt. They decided it was going to be too difficult to quilt that fancy, so they did, all the rest of it's quilted totally different. Now we're moving to another generation. So this would be the 3rd generation from Boyds Creek. It's, my mother-in-law was raised there where the schoolhouse is, and this is cobblestone variation. My mother-in-law made this one. And again, it was a planned quilt because there's a lot of one material in it. And it was quilted by Aunt Lillian Sutton Hammer. The Sutton family, I don't know whether any of you know the Sutton family that was Boyds Creek. And Aunt Lillian quilted this quilt. She quilted beautiful quilts. I don't know of any that she ever pieced.
So this is a 30s, right?
Yeah, and it's on point.
Which is not normal.
At that time, yeah.
What does that mean? On point? Normally, what they call a straight set is that blocks would be turned and just go straight across. If you turn them up, then see, you have to have
So they put rows together on the diagonal.
like this, across this way. It really enhances something.
I don't, when you look at just the corner of it, it's not pretty. You have to unfold that quilt to really get there.
It's a nice quilt.
So that's the third generation.
Oh, man, this is my favorite.
The next quilt is also done by my mother-in-law, and it's probably one of my favorite quilts other than the one my mother did. It's double wedding rings. And look how small the little blocks are.
Was it 13? Was 13?
Yeah, I think so.
This one's very plain. If you look across, you can see the red polka dot. I mean, and so that was very, because they're in all the arches. And then the jewels are the same. And then I was telling them earlier, this, whoever did the binding, did you say it was Lillian?
Aunt Lillian did that.
So I looked at this quilt and looked at it, and I was like, how in the world did they get that binding to be that sharp? And what she did was she would start on a point, well, let's say this point, and then she would go down to the next point, and then start again. And then she would finish the edge, turn it, and sew it on, and then she added it. So it was not one piece. It was piece to piece. And you can tell how crisp it looks. I mean, it's just.
And Aunt Lillian quilted this quilt and did the binding.
What year is that? This would be a 30s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
34.
The previous one was a 30s also.
It was actually easier to do it by hand than it is by sewing machine. So with the curves, so,
Look at the quilting.
yeah.
Very nice. So that was 40.
There was three generations.
That's three.
Okay, 4 generations. My wife pieced this when she was in high school, but we found it in some quilting boxes after she died, and she had not finished it. She didn't have enough pieces to finish it. So my daughter-in-law took it, and she tried to find matching green, and she couldn't find any green that would go with this at all. So she took it apart, and she made 3 wall hangings, one for each of my children and one for me. And then my daughter-in-law quilted the wall hangings. It was just the top and forward. So we went from my wife's great-grandmother to her grandmother to my mother-in-law to my wife to my daughter-in-law. And my daughter-in-law is moving back to Boyds Creek this week. But she hand quilted it. She likes to quilt. But those are some of the quilts. I think I have 37, I think, at home now. We tried to look at a few just to give you some idea of what they were like. Some utility quilts, but most of them were planned
Call it
quilts.
planned if you have money to buy it. It's called planned, not scrap. Also, if you, this is a grandmother's flower garden, but it's the most started quilt and the most never finished.
My wife didn't finish it. But this week, I opened a box and I found about 6 or 8 more of the pieces of the flower garden.
Oh, wow.
Yes, for yummy. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. Be sure.
The library books.
Yes. So we also have an assortment over here of library books that are available to be checked out at the library. And then don't forget to bid on our silent auction quilts. And then if you haven't, also sign up for the email so that you can be a friend of the Seymour Library. Join also there. And thank you for coming out. Yes.
Tell us about the quilts across the back. There's a very interesting story.
Okay, Patty, do you want to?
Okay, right back behind you, that. Yeah, you want to. Be careful for the picture. I've got it set down. Start with that end. So, this is the last quilt that, I have triplet granddaughters. Yes, it's been an adventure. They're 10 years old. This is when they were in between 8 and 9 year old. This was the last quilt that they did. I worked with them and they gave it to their dad on July the 4th. So they were super pumped. Their first one is up here on this corner. So yeah, that's the story about that is they are already true quilters because when we walk in the quilt store, they start pulling bolts of fabric. Start buying fabric.
Which one do you want us to go to next?
That one on the end, with Laura Stanford. Okay, this was their first quilt. I started them out first by hand stitching the blocks. And then when they were able to sit at the machine properly and put their foot on the pedal, then they were able to sew. So they made, they were making blocks. So we're just sewing those little blocks together. And one of them said, "What are we going to do with all these blocks?" And I said, "Well, you can do whatever you want." And she said, "Can we put them together and make a charity quilt?" Because they had heard that at our guild. And I said, "Well, sure, you can do whatever you want." But then they ended up giving it to their nanny. So she was super pumped about that. Okay, and then we went to a quilt fest one year. Like, is it Lily? Is that her name? Lily. And they were inspired and they said, "We can do this." So this one belongs to, let's see who did this one. Kate did this one? Yeah, Kate did. And these are panels. And they're super easy. All they did was add the borders. But I couldn't leave it like that. They had to do something to bump it up a notch. So I had them embroider on it just to give it a little bit of texture. So they didn't really care for that part, but they got what I was trying to do. So this was Abby's, and she got 5th place on hers. There was seven entrants that year, and 2 of them were 17 and 18. So they were up against older people. So this is, that's, actually that's Abby's. Now I'm all confused. It was Abby's. This one was Abby's. She's the one that won the ribbon. And she was very meticulous. If it wasn't perfect, then she would take it out. So she's a quilter. So that was Abby's. And then Whitley, that's that one. So that's Whitley's. So they got excited after that, wanted to make another one. We made the one for their dad, and as soon as we gave it to them, they turned around and said, "We want to make one for Mom." So, that's the story on those.
And the label.
Yes, they do have labels. They make their own labels.
Okay, well, this one's mine. This one is a denim. We'll show the back first, maybe. So here's the back is just all blue jeans that were old and faded and ripped. This one is a quilt as you go. This is one that I typically do hand stitching, but this one you cut the block These are my salad plates. I just traced them. But that's it.
Very cool.
And then these over here are Johanna's. Here, we'll hold them up.
My granddaughter decided that she wanted a quilt that had all her favorite things. So it's got corn on the cob, blueberries, music, flowers, everything that she picked all the fabrics and she picked the pattern. And she loves to go in, just like Patty's, that she loves to go in material stores and she's now feeling stuff like the quilters do. But that was fun doing with her because she was her idea.
How old is she?
She is now 20, but she was 12 when she picked out what she wanted. She didn't sew any, she just did all the fabric picking and all the pattern. And I guess it's fun to see. Many of you, I think, have probably done that. That's a really hard, it takes a lot of marking on paper what you're going to do next. I like purple.
I'll be there.
Oh, okay, well then this is the last one. This is the Irish chain. Now, my mom pieces the candy. And then I hand quilted it. I might finish it and
How long have you been working
I've
on
been
it?
working on it 3 years.
Kelly, talk about your frame.
Oh, so, okay,
It's all.
so I built the frame myself a few years ago. The frame that I wanted was $800, and I didn't have $800. So I found some pictures on Pinterest of what I wanted. This is a bookshelf that was sitting in our garage. I don't know if you can walk up, you can see the stripes here. My daughter stained it with me. My husband and I, we cut the grooves out exactly like I wanted them. And then it was a lot of trial and error because we didn't have a pattern. I was just stealing it off a picture. So I'd have to sit down and see if it fit and then play with it until I finally got it where I wanted it to be. I have $13 in it. That's the screws.
It's amazing. And she carries the tool kit to take it apart.
I do. I have my own drill set. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming tonight. Be safe going home and be sure that you did